The black Mercedes sedan lay overturned on the frozen asphalt like a dead animal, flames licking upward from the twisted engine compartment, consuming the winter night. Stars hung sharp as diamonds overhead, indifferent to the gasoline smell that burned the air thick and choking. The highway was empty, abandoned, a place where screams could echo for miles and no one would answer. Rowan Pierce's delivery van screeched to a stop, tires skidding on black ice. She was 28 years old but looked 45, with dark circles under her eyes like bruises that had become permanent, and she had been awake for 17 hours straight working a double shift at the diner. She did not hesitate. She did not calculate. She simply moved, her orthopedic shoes, the kind that cost money she did not have because her feet had been destroyed by standing on concrete floors since she was 16, crunching across broken glass toward the inferno. The heat hit her face like a slap. Inside the Mercedes, slumped against the steering wheel, a man lay bleeding. His suit was tailored Italian wool, the kind that costs more than everything Rowan owned. His hair was salt and pepper, swept back from a face carved from stone. A scar ran along his jawline like a blade, and his hands, even unconscious, bore the weight of command in their very shape. He was breathing, barely, his chest rising and falling beneath a white dress shirt now stained with blood from a gash along his temple. The door was locked. Rowan's hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something else. Something that looked like purpose. She found a rock, jagged, heavy, and smashed the window. Glass exploded inward. She reached through the opening, her palms slicing open on the shards, blood mixing with sweat, reaching for the manual lock with fingers that would not stop moving even as pain screamed up both arms. The lock gave way. The flames spread closer, orange and hungry, consuming the fuel tank with a sound like a living thing dying. She grabbed the man by his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy, 200 pounds of dead weight, his body refusing to cooperate, his expensive shoes dragging across the pavement. Every muscle in her small frame screamed. Every tendon burned. But she pulled, and she pulled, and she did not stop pulling until they were 20 feet away from the wreck, collapsing together onto the frozen ground just as the fuel tank exploded. The fireball lit up the night like a second sun. Heat washed over them in a wave. The man gasped, his eyes fluttering open for one moment, storm gray, penetrating, the eyes of someone accustomed to command, before closing again. His breathing steadied. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, growing closer. Rowan sat beside him on the freezing asphalt, her hands bleeding, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape her body. She looked at his face, at the controlled features, at the weight of something enormous hanging invisible around him like a cloak she could not see but could feel in the cold air itself. She did not know that the man she had just pulled from a burning car was Vincent Valenti. She did not know that his empire stretched across 3 states, that he controlled the docks and half the city council, that men trembled when his name was spoken in dark rooms. She did not know that in exactly 3 days, a federal investigation into his operations would begin, or that her name would be the thread that unraveled everything, or that the moment her hands touched him, her entire life shifted on its axis like a planet knocked out of orbit. What she knew was this: a man was alive because she refused to let him die. And in 3 days, her 7-year-old son Micah would go into surgery that cost $47,000, and she had $2 in her wallet. 2. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how Rowan Pierce came to be driving through the frozen night at all. Let us go back to 3 hours earlier, to 3:22 in the morning, in a diner called the Golden Bird where the coffee was stale and the dreams of everyone inside were even staler. The black and white checkered floor stretched empty beneath fluorescent lights that hummed like something mechanical dying, and Rowan Pierce stood behind the counter counting 2 crumpled dollar bills with the precision of a woman who understood that mathematics were survival. $1. $2. Nothing more. Nothing less. Her orthopedic shoes left wet prints on the tile as she moved, carrying a plastic tray of leftover pie from table 7, apple, barely eaten, the crust still warm if you did not think too hard about the health code violations. She moved the pie into a plastic container with the care of someone handling an artifact. This pie would be dinner for Micah tomorrow. The day after that, she had nothing planned. The day after that, nothing planned either. But Micah's surgery was in exactly 3 days, and it cost $47,000, and the deadline was written in her bones the way other people carried heartbeats. The diner was empty except for 3 men in suits that cost more than her monthly rent, sitting in a booth in the back corner. They had arrived 20 minutes ago. They ordered coffee and said nothing else, their eyes tracking the single elderly man sitting at the counter, the man who owed money to people who did not forgive debts the way other people forgave small things. His name was Marcus. He came to the Golden Bird every Tuesday at 2 a.m. for toast and conversation and the brief illusion of safety. Tonight, safety was leaving him. The youngest of the 3 men stood up. His name was Robert Hargrove, and he was 26 years old, and his family's money had bought him the kind of carelessness that passed for confidence in dark rooms. His suit was navy blue. His shoes were Italian leather. His hands, when he placed them on Marcus's shoulders, were trembling not from fear but from the intoxication of power, the power to hurt someone and not face consequences, the power that money and family connections provided like a shield no law could penetrate. "You know who I represent," Robert said. Not a question. A statement. The kind of statement that came with implied violence hanging in the air like cigarette smoke. Marcus did not answer. His coffee cup sat untouched on the counter, steam rising in pale wisps, growing cold. $7,200, Robert continued. You were supposed to pay that on Thursday. Today is Wednesday. You are 1 day late. You know what that means. Marcus shook his head. I don't have it yet. By Friday, I promise, I'll have. Robert's hand moved. Not to hit him. Just to grab his wrist, to twist it slightly, to communicate through pain what words could not articulate, that promises from broken men meant nothing, that debt was a language spoken only in suffering. The sound of the wrist twist was small. Quiet. A sound like a branch breaking in winter. That was when Rowan Pierce, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway with a plastic container of apple pie, moved. She did not think about it. Her body simply acted, the way bodies act when something inside them refuses to accept the broken mathematics of the world, that some people could hurt and others must simply accept hurt. She set the container down on the counter. Her hands were steady now, though minutes before they had been shaking from exhaustion and the specific terror that comes from having $2 and 3 days until everything changes. Let him go, she said. Her voice was soft. Not the voice of someone powerful. The voice of someone small, invisible, a night shift waitress who served coffee to hundreds of people each week who never once saw her, who left no tip because she was no one worth tipping. But there was something in the steadiness of that voice that made Robert Hargrove's hand loosen. Not because he was afraid, but because the audacity of invisibility suddenly speaking had caught him off guard. This doesn't concern you, Robert said. Let him go, Rowan repeated. The 3 men exchanged a look, a glance that passed between them like a stone thrown across dark water. Robert released Marcus's wrist. He stepped back. His friends remained seated in the booth, watching, saying nothing, their eyes tracking the waitress like she had just drawn a gun, like she had just spoken a language that dangerous men did not allow to be spoken in their presence. Rowan turned her back to them. She poured Marcus a fresh cup of coffee. The old man's wrist was red, already beginning to bruise, a small map of violence blooming across his skin. She set the coffee in front of him without meeting his eyes, without acknowledging the tears that had started running silently down his weathered face. Behind her, the booth was silent. The 3 men did not move. But in the shadows of that booth, in a corner so dark that Rowan had not even known it was occupied, a 4th man sat watching, and something inside him shifted. Vincent Valenti had been waiting in the Golden Bird since midnight, having just arrived back in New York from a meeting in Atlantic City that had not gone the way he planned. He was 61 years old, and he had built his empire by noticing things. He noticed when a waitress with hollow eyes and calloused hands refused to let an old man be destroyed over $7,200. He noticed the way her hands had steadied as she poured coffee. He noticed that she did not look at Robert Hargrove with fear or submission or any of the emotions people typically showed when they encountered his nephew's borrowed power. She looked at him with something that resembled pity. Vincent's lieutenant, a man named Rocco who had been with him for 17 years, sat across from him in the booth. Rocco leaned forward slightly, his voice low, his tone already shifting into the register of apology. "I can handle this, boss." The nephew overstepped. "He's drunk on his mother's name. I can remind him." Vincent raised his hand. One hand. One small gesture, and Rocco fell silent, understanding in that silence that his boss was not interested in handling anything. Not yet. Not until he understood what it was that had just happened in this empty diner at 3:22 in the morning, with frost on the windows and the smell of stale coffee and the echo of a woman's voice steady as stone. Rowan continued working. She did not know that she was being watched. She did not know that the man in the shadowed booth had lost a daughter at birth 15 years ago, that the daughter would have been 27 years old now, that he had not allowed himself to hope for anything resembling a future since the night she never took her first breath. She did not know that her simple act of refusing to let an old man be broken had reached into the part of him that was still human, still capable of being moved by courage from an unexpected source. She knew only that Micah had a surgery in 3 days, and that she had $2, and that nothing she did would ever be enough to save him. But she was wrong about that. Everything was about to change. Behind her, in the shadows, Vincent Valenti leaned back in his booth, and the cold grey eyes that had watched men beg for their lives now watched a waitress clear dirty coffee cups from a counter in a diner that nobody important ever visited. In those eyes, something cold and dangerous and utterly unstoppable stirred to life. The fluorescent lights hummed above her like a prayer that would not be answered. Rowan Pierce stood at the register counter of Angelo's diner, her orthopedic shoes squeaking against the black and white checkered tile, leaving wet prints from the slush outside, and in her trembling hands lay 2 crumpled dollar bills. Just 2. She straightened them on the cold counter, smoothing each one flat with the edge of her palm, as if the act of flattening them might somehow multiply them into something that mattered. The bills made soft whispering sounds against the laminate. She counted them again. 1. 2. Her voice came out barely audible, a whisper that sounded like surrender. $2. The diner was empty except for her. The clock above the kitchen window read 3:22 in the morning. In 12 hours, she would know if her son would live or die. 3 days ago, Rowan had sat in the office of Dr. Chen at St. Mary's Hospital downtown, the kind of office that smelled like antiseptic and broken futures. The manila folder on his desk lay open like a mouth about to deliver a verdict. Dr. Chen was a good man, a careful man, the sort of doctor who made eye contact when he delivered devastating news because he believed the person deserved to see his honesty. He folded his hands on top of the folder and began speaking words that Rowan had already rehearsed 1,000 times in her nightmares. "Micah's valve is deteriorating faster than we anticipated," Dr. Chen said, his voice steady and professional, which somehow made it worse. "The mitral valve replacement cannot wait. It has to happen within 1 week. 7 days maximum." Rowan's fingers went cold. She gripped the edge of the chair. The chair was plastic, mold, uncomfortable. Everything in a hospital was designed to be uncomfortable because comfort was a luxury for people with futures. "How much?" she asked. Her voice did not crack. She had learned years ago how to speak through fractures. Dr. Chen opened the folder. The number sat there in typescript, $47,000, and it might as well have been 400 million. The surgery itself, the operating room, the anesthesiologist, the hospital stay, the follow-up care, it comes to $47,000. Without insurance coverage, you would need to provide at least half as a deposit. $23,500. By Friday. He paused. He was watching her face. By Friday of this week. That gives you 5 days. Rowan stood up. She did not remember standing. The chair scraped backward. Her hands were shaking now, and there was nothing left in her to hold it together, so she let the shaking happen, let her fingers tremble as if they belonged to someone else, someone weak, someone who was not strong enough to save her own child. If I don't have it, we move him to the waiting list. We hope his condition doesn't deteriorate further. We pray. She had heard that word before. Pray. As if prayer was something the poor could afford, as if God accepted payment plans. Now, standing in the diner at 3:22 in the morning with $2 in her hands, Rowan did the mathematics that made her want to scream into the fluorescent silence. $47,000 needed. $2 in hand. $46,998 short. 3 days left. The numbers did not change no matter how many times she calculated them in her head, no matter how many times she whispered them into the empty diner. She had worked the double shift tonight, 4 p.m. until 3 a.m., 11 hours on her feet, her apron stained with spilled coffee and grease, her name tag hanging crooked from the left pocket where a safety pin should have held it. The diner was where lost people came at night. Truck drivers heading to nowhere, insomniacs, men who had not slept in 3 days and were using coffee as a substitute for whatever they had lost. She refilled their cups. She cleared their plates. She smiled even though smiling had become an act of violence against herself. 50 cents here. A quarter there. One man left a $5 bill after she brought him pie and black coffee and did not flinch when he cried into the plate, telling her his daughter had not called in 6 months. She had put that $5 in her apron pocket next to the coins. By the end of the night, she had earned $8.47. Combined with what she'd had before, she now possessed exactly $10.47. That was yesterday. She had spent $2 on a subway card to get to the hospital today, and another $1 on instant noodles for Micah because the hospital cafeteria food was poison and she wanted him to have something that tasted like home. Today's shift had been slower. $8 total. She had spent $6 on his prescription refill, just one of the medications he needed, and now she stood here at the register with 2 crumpled bills and the weight of the entire world. She pulled the college acceptance letter from her apron pocket. The envelope was torn at the corner, the paper yellowed, the ink slightly faded. NYU. Full scholarship. Mathematics department. Dated 8 years ago. 8 years of carrying proof that she had once been somebody, that she had tested into the top percentile in the state, that she had written an essay about the beauty of equations and how numbers never lied because people were too complicated to be mathematical. A professor had read that essay and written in the margins, "Your future is luminous. Come join us." She had never gone. She had gotten pregnant at 19. The father had disappeared before the pregnancy test came back positive. She had dropped out of the community college where she was taking prerequisites and given birth to Micah at St. Mary's, the same hospital where he now lay in a bed with a deteriorating heart valve. She had become a waitress. She had stayed a waitress. She had become the kind of woman that people did not see when they looked at her, the kind of woman who existed in the margins of other people's lives, refilling their water glasses, clearing their debris, smiling even though her own child was dying and she had no way to save him. She smoothed the letter next to the $2 on the counter. The letter and the money looked obscene together, proof of what she might have been, and proof of what she actually was. The frost on the diner windows had begun to melt as dawn approached. Pink light broke through, catching the ice patterns and transforming them into something almost beautiful. Almost. The same way her life had been almost beautiful once, before it had calcified into this, $2, 3 days, a 7-year-old boy sleeping downtown with broken machinery in his chest, and a woman who had learned to count the distance between hope and mathematics. The kitchen was silent behind her. The line cook had gone home at midnight. She was alone in Angelo's diner, in this place where nobody important ever came, with the fluorescent lights buzzing like the sound of time running out and the smell of burnt coffee and old grease hanging in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. She folded the letter and put it back in her pocket next to her heart, next to the $2, next to the math that would not add up no matter how many times she tried. Meanwhile, across the city in a neighborhood that existed in an entirely different universe, Vincent Valenti was not sleeping either. His penthouse overlooked Manhattan from the 42nd floor, windows framing the city like a painting of a world that belonged to him. Black marble floors. White leather furniture. Modern art on the walls that cost more than most people earned in a year. He stood at the window in his black silk pajama pants and open black shirt, the scar on his chest visible, a line running from his collarbone to his ribs, a souvenir from a war that had ended before Micah Pierce was even born. His phone had vibrated twice in the last hour. Messages from Rocco. Business. Always business. Vincent did not answer. He was watching the city wake up. He was watching the poor and the desperate begin their day shift. Somewhere down there, in a diner that served burnt coffee to people with nowhere else to go, a waitress was counting money that would never be enough. He did not know this yet. But in exactly 48 hours, his entire life would turn on a single moment in that diner, a moment of such unexpected grace that it would undo everything he had spent 15 years building toward, which was nothing. All of it had been nothing. All the money, all the power, all the men who bent their knees. It had all been constructed to avoid feeling what he was about to feel when a woman with trembling hands stood between a stranger and violence. But that was not yet. For now, the city was still. The dawn was still pink. And Rowan Pierce was still nobody, still counting dollars that would not save her son. The diner smells like burnt coffee and desperation. It is 9:11 in the morning, and the breakfast rush has evaporated into the worn vinyl booths and sticky linoleum floor. Rowan Pierce stands behind the counter restocking coffee cups, her movements mechanical after 3 hours of pouring refills for construction workers and night shift nurses. The orthopedic shoes pinch her feet. She has been awake for 19 hours straight. At the counter, an old man sits alone. His name is Mr. Castellano. He is 72 years old, retired sheet metal worker, widower, grandfather of 3. His hands shake as he lifts the black coffee to his lips. The trembling is not from age. It is from fear. He owes money to people who do not accept late payments like banks do. He owes money to people who extract payment in blood. The door chimes. The sound cuts through the quiet like a blade. Robert Hargrove walks in with the swagger of a man who has never earned anything but inherited everything. He is 28 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a leather jacket that cost $2,000 and designer jeans that cost $300. A gold Rolex catches the fluorescent light on his wrist. 2 men flank him, hired muscle in cheap suits that don't fit right across the shoulders. They move like predators entering a cage they own. Hargrove approaches Mr. Castellano directly. The old man's body goes rigid. Mr. Castellano, Hargrove says, voice dripping with false warmth. You're 3 weeks late. Mr. Castellano's voice comes out fractured, a whisper wrapped in panic. I told your people, my pension check hasn't arrived yet. Social Security said next week, I swear it. I have always paid on time before. Please. Just 1 more week. Hargrove leans against the counter. He grabs the old man's shirt collar and yanks him half off the stool. The motion is casual, the cruelty precise. I don't care about your pension check. I don't care about next week. You owe my family $8,000. Today. The cook in the back kitchen pretends he is deaf. The other waitress, Maria, looks out the window at the street. They have learned not to see. Rowan watches from behind the coffee station, her heart pounding so hard she can hear it in her ears. Hargrove raises his fist. Mr. Castellano flinches, covering his face with skeletal arms. Nobody disrespects the Hargrove name, Hargrove says. You pay, or I take it from your granddaughter. Pretty girl. Works at the flower shop on 5th, doesn't she? Maybe I visit her instead. Mr. Castellano's face goes white. A sound comes from his throat like a wounded animal. Rowan doesn't think. She moves. She steps between them. 5'4" in orthopedic shoes facing a man 6 inches taller. Her voice is steady despite the trembling that runs through her entire body like an electric current. Leave him alone. Hargrove turns, surprised at first, then amused. His thugs actually laugh. And who the hell are you? Someone who's tired of watching bullies hurt old men, Rowan says. The diner has gone silent. The kind of silence that exists before violence. Hargrove steps closer to her, invading her space. His cologne is expensive and cloying. You got a death wish, sweetheart. Rowan doesn't back down. She stands there in her stained apron, her hair falling out of its bun, her hands balled into fists at her sides. I've got nothing left to lose. You want to hit somebody, hit me. Leave him alone. Hargrove reaches for her wrist. His fingers are inches away. A voice cuts through the diner like a blade wrapped in ice. One word, spoken soft but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Robert. Every person in the diner freezes. Rowan's hand falls to her side. Mr. Castellano's breath catches. The two thugs straighten immediately, hands dropping, eyes forward. A man rises from the back booth. The booth Rowan never noticed was occupied. He has been sitting in the shadows the entire time, his espresso untouched and cooling on the table. Vincent Valenti. 43 years old, 6'2", powerfully built beneath a charcoal three-piece suit that costs more than Rowan makes in a month. Dark hair with silver threading at the temples. Scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a line of white against olive skin. He wears a gold watch and 2 silver rings. When he stands, the air in the room changes pressure. He walks forward slowly, each step deliberate. His shoes click against the tile floor. Click! 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 The sound of footsteps that belong to a man accustomed to people moving out of his way. Hargrove's face drains of color. The swagger vanishes. He becomes a boy again, small and frightened. Mr. Valenti. I didn't know you were here. I didn't realize. Vincent stops 3 feet away. His eyes, dark gray like storm clouds, fix on Hargrove with an intensity that makes the younger man's legs shake. You didn't know I was here. That much is obvious. Or you wouldn't be threatening civilians in broad daylight in a place I own. Hargrove stammers. This old man owes money. To my family. He's delinquent. I was just collecting. The debt is forgiven, Vincent says. His voice is deep and solid like an oath, like the foundation of a building that will never fall. Leave. Now. Take your men. Don't come back. And if I ever hear that you've threatened Mr. Castellano again, or his granddaughter, or anyone connected to him, you'll spend the rest of your life explaining to doctors why you still have all your bones intact. Am I clear? Hargrove nods so fast his head nearly detaches from his neck. Yes. Yes, Mr. Valenti. Crystal clear. Thank you for your mercy. Hargrove and his thugs scatter like roaches when the light comes on. They move toward the door, pushing each other in their panic to leave first. The door chimes again. They are gone. Mr. Castellano's hands shake worse now, but this time with relief. He reaches for Rowan's arm. His grip is gentle, grateful. Thank you, he whispers. You saved my life. Rowan watches Vincent. He is looking at her with an expression she cannot read. Something flickers across his face, a shadow of something ancient and wounded. You should go home, Rowan tells the old man softly. Rest. You're safe. Mr. Castellano nods and leaves cash on the counter, more than his coffee costs. He walks out slowly, looking back once at Rowan with eyes full of gratitude and fear. The diner settles back into its ordinary quiet. The cook returns to flipping eggs. Maria goes back to her tables. But Vincent Valenti remains standing. He looks at Rowan for a long moment, really looks at her, and something in his chest breaks open in a way that terrifies him. Rowan meets his eyes briefly, then nods once. Thank you, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. She turns and walks back to her tables, back to her second shift, back to her ordinary life of extraordinary desperation. Vincent watches her go. He pulls out his phone and types a single message, find out everything about the waitress. He hit send. That afternoon, his penthouse office overlooks the Manhattan skyline. Windows frame the city like a painting of a world that belongs only to him. Vincent sits behind a desk made from a single slab of black marble. His two most trusted lieutenants stand before him. Rocco is thick-necked and bald, loyal as a junkyard dog, built like a pile of concrete. Theo is younger, sharper-eyed, hungry in a way that makes him dangerous. The waitress from this morning, Rocco says carefully. The one who stood up to Hargrove. Want us to check her out? Vincent stares out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there in the maze of streets, Rowan Pierce is working her shift, counting the minutes until she can check on her son. She doesn't know he is thinking of her. She doesn't know that a single word from him has just rewritten her entire life. Her name is Rowan Pierce, Vincent says quietly. Find out everything. Everything? Theo asks. Everything, Vincent confirms. Where she lives. Who she loves. What she owes. What she's running from. I want to know the color of her son's eyes. The lieutenants exchange a glance. In 15 years of working for Vincent Valenti, they have never heard him ask for this kind of detailed investigation on a civilian. Especially not a waitress who makes $8 an hour. Rocco and Theo leave to make calls. They reach out to sources, bank managers, hospital records, rental companies, school administrators. By evening, a file sits on Vincent's desk. Theo delivers it personally, sets it down with ceremonial care, and withdraws. Vincent opens the file and reads aloud into the silence of his penthouse office. Rowan Pierce. 26 years old. Single mother. Son named Micah Pierce, age 7. Born with a congenital heart condition. Surgery required within the next 3 days. Cost, $47,000. Current savings, $47 and change. She works double shifts at Angelo's Diner, walks for miles each way to save bus fare, sleeps 3 hours a night on average. She was accepted to Columbia University 15 years ago, full scholarship, but never attended. Her mother needed medical care. She has been working since age 14. No criminal record. No social media presence. No family besides her son. No romantic relationship. No friend outside of work. She owns nothing except a mattress and a belief that somehow, against all evidence, her life is going to get better. Vincent closes the file. His office is quiet except for the hum of the city below, millions of people living their lives, most of them safe, most of them loved, most of them never knowing what it feels like to have a child you never got to hold. Behind him on the credenza sits a photograph in a silver frame. A nursery. Pale yellow walls. A crib with white bedding, empty forever. He never shows this photograph to anyone. The girl who was supposed to sleep there had a name, Isabella. She was supposed to be born on a Thursday in April. Instead, she came on a Tuesday in March, stillborn, blue, silent, perfect and dead. That was 18 years ago. That was the day Vincent Valenti stopped believing in God. Rocco appears in the doorway. Boss, what do you want us to do? Vincent turns from the window. Watch her. Protect her. She doesn't know I exist, and she cannot know. She is to be kept safe. Understood. That night, clear winter cold, frost coating the city like death in slow motion. Rowan leaves the hospital after visiting Micah. She walks through frozen streets, her breath misting in the darkness. She wears a coat that is too thin, a coat she bought 3 years ago at a thrift store for $5. 3 blocks behind her, a black SUV moves slowly through traffic. Inside, Rocco drives, Theo watches from the passenger seat. They follow her all the way to her apartment building in the outer boroughs, a 4th-floor walk-up with a broken elevator and graffiti on the walls that spells out the pain of people who live in the cracks of the city. Rowan climbs the stairs slowly. Her legs ache. She climbs for flights and unlocks her door. Inside, one room, a hot plate in the corner, a mattress on the floor with blankets she has washed so many times they are thin as paper. On a card table sit hospital bills. Each one is stamped urgent. Each one is stamped final notice. The total is $47,000. Due in 3 days. She sits on the mattress and pulls out a torn piece of paper. A college acceptance letter from 15 years ago, the ink faded, the edges worn from being handled so many times. Columbia University. Full scholarship. She was supposed to become something. She was supposed to change the trajectory of her own life. Instead, she became her mother's nurse, then her mother's pallbearer, then her son's sole provider. She holds the letter and cries silently, her body shaking with the weight of choices that were never really choices at all. Across the city, in a different universe entirely, Cordelia Blackwood sits in her Tribeca penthouse. Marble floors so polished they reflect the city lights like water. Paintings on the walls that are insured for millions. She wears a champagne-colored silk robe and holds a crystal flute of actual champagne, the kind that costs $300 a bottle. Her phone rings. It is her son, Robert. "Mother," he says, his voice shaking. "Vincent Valenti humiliated me today. In front of people. Because of some waitress." Cordelia's eyes narrow. She sets down her champagne glass. "Tell me." Robert explains. How he was collecting on a debt. How the waitress intervened. How Valenti appeared and shut the entire thing down. How Valenti forgave the debt. Vincent Valenti noticed a waitress. Cordelia's voice is cold, like winter, like a blade. She is 53 years old and beautiful in a way that has been calculated and maintained with obsessive precision. She is draped in jewelry worth $500,000. She has never worked a day in her life. Her wealth is old money from her father's real estate empire, layered over dirty money from her late husband's Mafia connections, protected by her untouchable social position and her willingness to weaponize the social cruelty of the Upper East Side like a surgeon wielding a scalpel. "What's her name?" Cordelia asks. Robert tells her. Cordelia hangs up without saying goodbye. She makes 3 phone calls. Within an hour, she knows everything about Rowan Pierce. Within 2 hours, she has decided that this poor waitress needs to be destroyed, publicly, systematically, completely. A woman like Cordelia does not tolerate being forgotten in favor of a nobody. Especially not when that nobody threatens the power structure that keeps women like Cordelia untouchable. What Rowan does not know, as she lies on her mattress that night staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until Micah's surgery, is that her life is about to change in ways that will terrify and transform her. Vincent Valenti sits in his office at midnight. He makes 1 phone call. A single sentence spoken in Italian to a man whose job is to move money through systems that make it invisible. Buy the hospital debt. All of it. Make it disappear. By morning, $47,000 in medical bills will cease to exist. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed a sound like dying insects, white and merciless, stripping away pretense. Rowan sat in the waiting room at 4:17 in the afternoon, her fingers working the edges of a torn piece of paper until the fibers separated like confessions. The acceptance letter from community college, 3 years old, stuffed in her jacket pocket for 730 days. Full scholarship. She'd turned it down to work double shifts when Micah was diagnosed. The letter was her reminder of what she'd sacrificed, and also proof that she could have been something else in another life, a life where her son did not need $47,000 to stay alive. The shift supervisor at Angelo's diner had avoided her eyes that morning. His name was Derek, and he'd worked alongside her for 4 years, eating her leftover pancakes during his break, complaining about his wife, accepting her small kindnesses without ever once asking where her own meals came from. He'd stood at the host stand with the phone cord wrapped around his wrist like a restraint. "Rowan, I'm sorry," he'd said, and the apology came too early, before any real wrongdoing had been named. "I have to let you go." She'd felt the words before she heard them, a recognition of something inevitable arriving exactly on schedule. Why? She'd already known. That's the devastating thing about destruction. Once it starts, you recognize its shape. Someone called the owner. Said you were stealing from the register. Said you've been skimming cash, falsifying receipts. Derek's voice was a whisper that somehow made it worse. Said you've been committing fraud. That's not true. I know, he'd said, and those two words contained an entire goodbye. But the owner said he can't risk it. He's sorry. I'm sorry. You need to leave now. She'd walked out into the November cold with her apron folded over her arm, still smelling like coffee and grease. The laundromat came next. The owner, a man named Henry who'd employed her for evenings and weekends, had already made his decision before she arrived. He stood in the back office, hands in his pockets, avoiding the full weight of looking at her. Your references, he'd said, which made no sense because she'd never given him references. Multiple calls came in yesterday. Complaints. People saying you're untrustworthy, that there were issues at your previous workplace. I can't employ someone with that kind of background. What complaints? From who? He wouldn't answer. Couldn't answer. The phone calls had come from above, from somewhere in the architecture of power that existed in the spaces between worlds like hers and worlds that belonged to people like Cordelia Blackwood. By noon she had zero income and the medical bill was still $47,000 and still breathing, still waiting, still astronomical in its indifference to her suffering. Dr. Chen's office smelled like antiseptic and the particular sadness of a place where bad news got delivered regularly. The doctor sat across from her with Micah's file open, and Rowan could see the surgery date circled in red marker, 3 days from now, as if the circle itself was a cage. The surgery is scheduled, Dr. Chen said carefully, but we need the down payment in the next 48 hours to hold the operating room. Insurance will cover most of the remaining costs, but without that initial payment, we lose the surgical slot. Another surgery won't be available for 6 weeks. Rowan's hands were trembling. She could see them shaking as if they belonged to someone else, someone weaker, someone who'd already failed. I don't have it, she whispered. The words came out broken, fragmenting. I had the money. I was so close. But I lost my jobs today. Someone called and made complaints and I got fired from both places in the same morning and I don't have it and I don't know how to get it and Micah will die and I failed him and... Dr. Chen was reaching across the desk, pressing tissues into her hands, but Rowan couldn't stop. Please. Payment plans. Anything. I'll sign anything, I'll work anything, I'll give you whatever I have left and I'll pay the rest for the rest of my life, I don't care, I just need. I'm so sorry, Dr. Chen said, and her voice was genuinely broken. I've already advocated for you. I've done everything I can. But hospital policy is hospital policy. Without the down payment by tomorrow night, they'll release the surgical slot. Rowan left the office. She walked down 4 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator because she needed the weight of gravity, needed to feel herself moving. Outside, the winter sun was already sinking, and the sky had turned that particular shade of blue that happens only in the moments before darkness wins. The pedestrian bridge over the East River was 2 blocks away. She found herself walking toward it without consciously deciding to go. Her feet simply moved across frozen sidewalks, over concrete that crunched with ice crystals. The bridge was mostly empty at that hour, just one jogger passing in the opposite direction, breath trailing behind him like smoke. The railing was metal, painted black, stretching the length of the bridge like a spine. The water below was black too, genuine black, with chunks of ice floating like pale bones. 4 stories down. Maybe more. The current would be cold enough to stop a heart in minutes. Quick. Efficient. An end to the mathematics of never having enough, of $2 being all that stood between survival and ruin, of a son waiting in a hospital bed for a mother who couldn't save him. She climbed onto the first rung of the railing. The metal bit through her thin jacket, cold enough to burn. The wind coming up from the water was like a blade wrapped in ice, exactly the kind of thing that would hurt for just a moment before the numbness set in. She looked down at the black water. She looked at her hands, which were shaking so badly they seemed to vibrate. One more step. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once. Twice. She almost ignored it. Almost kept moving. But the buzzing continued, insistent, mechanical, refusing to be dismissed. She climbed down slowly. Pulled the phone out with fingers that felt like they belonged to a dead person. A text from the hospital. From Dr. Chen's office. 3 words, please return immediately. She stared at the message for a long time. The words didn't make sense. There was no down payment. There was no surgery. There was nothing left to return for. But something in her, some fragment of instinct that hadn't yet surrendered, made her walk back the way she'd come. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away and 60 floors above the street, Cordelia Blackwood was pouring a second glass of wine in her penthouse. The charity luncheon had gone perfectly. 20 women in designer dresses, all of them carrying the particular power of old money and untouchable social position. She'd stood at the head of the table with her champagne flute catching the afternoon light like a weapon. I want to warn all of you about a con artist operating in our city, Cordelia had said, her voice smooth as silk stretched over glass. A so-called poor waitress named Rowan Pierce. She's been approaching generous people, claiming her child needs emergency surgery, playing on their sympathy, collecting money under false pretenses. She's been reported to authorities for fraud, manipulation, financial exploitation of vulnerable donors. The women had gasped. Phones had appeared. Within minutes, Rowan's name was spreading across social media like a virus, each share a death blow, each comment a nail in a coffin already being built. Cordelia had smiled while sipping her wine, and the smile had contained the satisfaction of a woman who understood that the most efficient weapon was other people's cruelty. But at 11:58 that night, Cordelia's lawyer called. "We have a problem," he said, and his voice was the sound of a man whose world was collapsing in real time. "The FBI contacted me an hour ago. They're investigating your offshore accounts. All of them." Cordelia's wine glass had frozen halfway to her lips. "That's impossible. Those accounts are layered through shell corporations in 3 countries. No one can trace them." "Someone did," the lawyer said. "Someone with resources, someone inside the system. They compile documentation so detailed and complete that it's devastating. The FBI has been building this case for months, apparently. They're moving now. Cordelia, I think." She'd hung up. The wine glass had slipped from her fingers and shattered against marble, spreading crimson across white stone like a prophecy. At that same moment, in a luxury apartment 6 blocks away, Robert Hargrove was sleeping. He woke to the sound of his apartment door exploding inward. The door had been solid oak, installed by a professional, expensive. It came apart like kindling. 12 men in tactical gear moved through the darkness like ghosts, like weapons with human shadows. They moved through his bedroom with weapons raised, flashlights cutting the dark into searchlights. Robert Hargrove, the lead agent said, a woman with her weapon trained center mass. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest." Robert had stumbled backward, naked except for boxer shorts, his face still confused with sleep. "What the hell, what is this? Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are," the agent said. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney..." They'd thrown him against the wall, face first, and the impact had broken his nose. He'd felt blood streaming down his face, hot and immediate and wrong. "You don't understand," he'd gasped. "My mother, she has connections, she knows people, this can be fixed, I can call my mother." "Your mother is being arrested simultaneously," the agent said. "We have 240 pages of documentation. Racketeering, extortion, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. Multiple conspiracies. Multiple murders. This case is airtight, Mr. Hargrove. You're going to federal prison." They'd cuffed him, his hands wrenched behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists. When they'd walked him toward the door, flashbulbs had exploded in his face. News cameras. News helicopters. Vincent's doing. Everything orchestrated, everything inevitable. By 1 in the morning, the footage was playing on every channel. Robert Hargrove led out of his luxury apartment in handcuffs, face bleeding, eyes wild with panic, crying, absolutely broken. The anchor's voice was steady, breaking news from the New York field office. The FBI has arrested Robert Hargrove and his mother Cordelia Blackwood in connection with a major racketeering investigation spanning 3 decades. Sources say the arrests are tied to organized crime activities and multiple violent offenses. Both face federal charges carrying combined sentences exceeding 80 years. In her penthouse, Cordelia had stood facing 6 FBI agents, her elegant face finally cracking. Mascara running. The carefully constructed armor of her power falling away like a costume discarded. She'd screamed as they'd cuffed her, her voice raw and desperate and finally human. Vincent Valenti, she'd screamed. He did this. He destroyed us for some nobody waitress. Vincent Valenti, he's the one, he's behind everything. But the agents had simply read her rights and walked her out of the building just as they'd walked her son out of his apartment. No mercy. No negotiation. No possibility of using wealth or connections or social standing to escape what was coming. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and cold tile floors. Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs as she walked toward the pediatric wing, her worn shoes squeaking with each step. The text had come through at 4:08 p.m., urgent and cryptic, return to St. Mary's immediately. Dr. Chen requests your presence. She'd left the diner mid-shift, her hand still smelling of grease and coffee, her mind racing through catastrophes. Micah. Something was wrong with Micah. Dr. Chen stood waiting outside room 317, her face transformed by something Rowan had not seen in months. A smile. A genuine, radiant smile. Ms. Pierce, Dr. Chen said, gesturing her into a small consultation room. Please, sit down. Rowan Saturday. Her legs were trembling. What happened? Is he okay? Did something? Micah is perfectly fine, Dr. Chen interrupted gently. I have extraordinary news. An anonymous donor has paid for his entire surgery. All $47,000. Plus post-operative care, recovery monitoring, everything. Dr. Chen's eyes glistened. The payment cleared this afternoon. We can schedule Micah's surgery for tomorrow morning at 7. Rowan's breath stopped. The room tilted. I don't, what? Who would? Her voice fractured. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed into the chair, her body finally releasing 6 months of terror that had been locked in her chest like a stone. She sobbed, great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere below her ribs, below her bones, from the part of her that had been preparing for the worst since the moment Micah's cardiologist had said the words critical condition. There's no name attached to the donation, Dr. Chen continued softly. They insisted on complete anonymity. But someone saw your son's case and decided to help. Rowan could not speak. She pressed her palms against her eyes and wept until her throat burned. The surgery happened on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. sharp. Rowan sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, her body rigid in the uncomfortable plastic chair, clutching the torn college acceptance letter like a prayer. The paper was worn now, creased and fragile from being folded and unfolded so many times. New York University, class of 2019, it read at the top. She'd been accepted when Micah was still in her belly, when her future had still felt possible. She deferred again, then never enrolled. 8 years of deferred dreams. At 3 p.m., Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical doors. Her mask was down. Her smile said everything. The surgery was perfect, she said, and Rowan felt something inside her that had been locked for years finally break open. His heart is strong. The repair is clean. He's going to be fine, Ms. Pierce. Your son is going to be fine. Rowan wept again, but this time the tears tasted like salt and hope and something close to faith. The recovery unfolded like a flower opening after months of frost. 3 months passed. The winter that had been so cruel and sharp began to soften into early spring. Rowan returned to work at Angelo's diner, but everything had changed. A week after Micah came home, running, playing, his small heart beating strong and steady, a man entered the diner during her lunch shift. He was older, 50s perhaps, with kind eyes and a coffee stain on his cardigan. "You're Rowan," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." "Can I help you?" "My name is Marcus Chen. I own the Riverside bookstore on 5th Avenue. I heard you needed work. That you were looking for something stable, something with benefits. I'd like to offer you a manager position. 40 hours a week, health insurance, paid leave." He set a business card on the counter. "I have a feeling you'd be good with books." Rowan stared at the card. "Why would you? How did you?" "Someone recommended you very highly," he said simply. "Trusted source. I don't ask too many questions when someone I respect tells me a person is worth investing in." She took the job. 3 days later, her landlord, a man who'd been threatening eviction for 6 months, called her into his office and said, "Your back rent has been paid. 3 months. Anonymous payment. You're all caught up." He wouldn't explain further. He looked confused himself, as if the money had simply materialized from thin air. Every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, Rowan noticed the same black SUV parked across from the bookstore. It never approached. No one ever emerged. It would sit there for exactly 2 hours, then disappear into the city. At first she was afraid. Then she realized whoever was watching over. Rocco and Theo took turns, their eyes always on the bookstore window, reporting back to a man they served with the kind of absolute loyalty most people reserved for God. Vincent Valenti never came. Never spoke. Never intruded. He simply watched from the shadows as Rowan Pierce, who had once counted 2 crumpled dollar bills at 3 a.m. and believed that was all she would ever be, became someone strong enough to stand on her own. For months after Micah's surgery, Rowan enrolled in night classes at community college. She sat in classrooms filled with people half her age and twice her privilege, and she learned calculus and literature and philosophy. She worked 40 hours at the bookstore, came home to Micah, kissed his forehead while he slept, then spent her evenings filling notebooks with her own handwriting. The torn acceptance letter from 8 years ago, the one that said deferred, went into a frame on her bedroom wall. No longer a symbol of failure. A symbol of resilience. Proof that some things, when you refuse to let them die, can be resurrected. 6 months after the burning car rescue, a handwritten envelope arrived at the bookstore. Cream-colored paper. Expensive. Her name written in precise, deliberate script. Inside was an invitation. "You are invited to dinner. Marchetti's Italian restaurant. Saturday 8 p.m. Private booth. This is not a request. Come alone. A friend." Rowan recognized the restaurant name. It was connected to Angelo's diner, part of some larger network she'd never paid attention to. She almost threw the invitation away. Some instinct, the same instinct that had made her pull a stranger from a burning car, told her to keep it. Saturday evening arrived sharp and cold, the stars above the city like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Rowan put on her nicest dress, the one she'd bought for her community college orientation. Simple, dark blue, modest. She'd cut her hair, gained weight in her cheeks, lost the hollow look of someone dying slowly from the inside. The host at Marchetti's greeted her by name. Somehow, he knew exactly who she was. He led her through the restaurant, past tables of people in expensive clothes, past the smell of garlic and wine and burning candles, to a private booth at the back of the room. He was waiting. Rowan stopped moving. The man sitting across the booth's red velvet seats was the same man she'd pulled from the burning car 6 months ago. The stranger she'd thought she'd never see again. But now, in the soft candlelight, with his dark hair and the intense eyes that reminded her of a storm rolling in, she realized she knew him from somewhere else too. Some conversation overheard at the diner. Some name whispered by nervous men in suits. "You," she said. Vincent Valenti stood slowly. He was tall, 6'2" at least, and he moved with the kind of deliberate control that told her he had learned to move through the world like a knife cutting through air. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Ms. Pierce. Thank you for coming. Rowan Saturday." The silence between them stretched like a held breath. "From the highway," she said finally. "The accident. I pulled you from the burning car." "You did," Vincent said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "I never got to thank you. You disappeared before the ambulance arrived. I've spent 6 months wondering if I'd imagined you." "Are you okay?" Rowan asked. "I always wondered if you made it." "Because of you, I did." He paused. A waiter appeared with wine that Vincent must have ordered in advance. He disappeared again. Vincent continued, "6 months ago, I watched you stand between an armed man and an elderly stranger in a diner. I was in the back booth. I watched you risk everything you had, which was almost nothing, to protect someone you'd never met. I watched you face down a bully when you had a child at home depending on you. Later that same night, you pulled me from a burning car. You didn't know who I was. You didn't want anything from me. You were just—" He stopped, searching for words. "Good. Impossibly good." Rowan felt ice in her chest. "Mr. Valenti." "My name is Vincent," he interrupted quietly. "And before you ask, yes. The surgery. The job. The apartment. That was me." The restaurant tilted slightly. Rowan gripped the edge of the table. "Why would you?" "Because I lost a daughter 18 years ago," Vincent said. His voice cracked, barely noticeable, but there. "Isabella. She never took a first breath. I built an empire. I controlled a city. But I couldn't save her. I couldn't save the one thing that mattered." He looked at her directly, and his eyes held something raw and exposed that a man like him probably hadn't shown anyone in decades. "When I watched you fight for that old man, when you risked your life to save mine, I saw something I thought was extinct in this world. Real courage. Real selflessness. A person who gives everything and asks for nothing." Rowan's hands were shaking. "How did you know about Micah?" "About the surgery." "I have resources," Vincent said simply. "People who investigate. People who listen. When I learned that your son's heart could be fixed, but that you were going to watch him die rather than ask anyone for help, that you were going to let pride or shame or fear keep you from saving him." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I couldn't let that happen." "You've been watching me," Rowan said. It wasn't a question. "From a distance. Always at a distance. I wanted you to rebuild your life without feeling obligated to me. Without owing me anything. I simply wanted you to be safe. To be strong again." Rowan reached across the table. Her hand found his, and she placed it gently against his palm. The touch was deliberate, unhurried, a choice. "Thank you for saving my son," she said quietly. Vincent's fingers closed around hers like he was afraid she might disappear. "Thank you for saving me first." They sat in the candlelight as the frost outside made patterns on the windows, two people who had pulled each other from different kinds of fire. The city hummed beyond the walls. Neither of them heard it. Real strength is not found in never falling. It is found in always standing back up. Rowan had fallen to rock bottom, had counted her last $2 and believed that was all the universe would ever allow her to be. But strength is not measured in what you possess, it is measured in what you do when you possess nothing. She had stood up for a stranger. She had pulled a man from a burning car. She had refused to give up on her son, even when the world told her to surrender. And somewhere in that darkness, someone saw her light and protected it until she was strong enough to stand on her own. If this story moved your heart, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will shake you to your core. Drop a comment below. What would you do with only $2 left to your name? Thank you for watching, and remember, you are stronger than you know. No matter how hard life gets, the sky always clears after the rain. We'll see you in the next video.